If you've ever worked the overnight shift at Walmart, you'll know it's not just quiet, it's weird. I've done my share of graveyard shifts in my time, but this one takes the cake. It started the way most of my nights there do. Tired, caffeinated, and eager to clock out as soon as possible. It was 2:37 a.m., according to the flickering clock above the customer service desk, when I first noticed it. I was in aisle 12, restocking paper towels and toilet paper. My manager, Jen, was in the back office, and as far as I knew, the only other employee on shift was Carl, who was cleaning up the frozen food section after some kid decided to paint the floor with melted ice cream. The overhead speakers played Walmart's generic playlist, a sickly sweet contrast to the emptiness of the store. That's when I heard a faint crash echoing from the back. Not just a little thud. This was the kind of sound you'd expect if someone knocked over a shelf full of glass jars. I froze. "Carl?" I called out, but my voice got swallowed by the vast, empty aisles. No answer. I figured it was one of the giant pallets tipping over in the stockroom. I grabbed my phone and started walking toward the sound, the fluorescent lights buzzing above me. When I reached the end of the aisle, I saw something, or someone, dart across the opposite end of the store, too fast to be Carl. It wasn't a casual walk or even a jog. It was more like skittering, like whatever it was didn't know how to move properly. My pulse quickened. "Hello? Is someone there?" I asked, my voice sharper now. No reply. I turned toward the storage area, trying to shake the unease crawling up my spine. That's when I noticed the lights at the far end of the store start flickering. Just one at first, then another, until it looked like the entire section was in a low-budget horror film. The weirdest part? It wasn't random. The flickering was moving, heading straight for me. I stood there, rooted to the spot as the flickering lights drew closer, their erratic pattern almost hypnotic. It wasn't just the lights anymore. There was a noise, a faint scraping sound, like metal dragging against the tiled floor, just barely audible over the ambient music. "Carl?" I tried again, but my voice cracked this time. Still no answer. My gut told me to head for the front doors and not look back, but my curiosity, or stupidity, got the better of me. I gripped my phone tighter and activated the flashlight, sweeping it across the aisles as I approached the back of the store. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud in the eerie silence. Aisle 16, the canned goods section, came into view. That's when I saw it. A single can of soup rolled out from the shelf and stopped in the middle of the aisle. No one pushed it, no one bumped into the shelf. It just rolled, slow and deliberate. My flashlight caught the label, Campbell's Tomato Soup. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. Almost. Then I heard a whisper. Not words exactly, more like a breathy murmur that came from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was enough to send a jolt of fear straight through me. I turned in a full circle, flashlight trembling in my hand. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice wavering. "This isn't funny." The whispering stopped, replaced by a sudden, deafening clang. It sounded like a steel door slamming shut. The storage room, I realized. My heart was hammering now. Whatever this was, it wasn't Carl, and it wasn't normal. I crept toward the storage area, my flashlight dancing across the racks of merchandise. The closer I got, the colder the air became. By the time I reached the storage door, I could see my breath misting in front of me. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle. A faint rustling sound came from behind the door. It wasn't just a single noise, it was layered, like dozens of small movements happening at once. Against every survival instinct screaming in my head, I pushed the door open. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Metallic and damp, like rusted iron soaked in stagnant water. My flashlight beam swept across the room, illuminating pallets stacked high with unopened boxes. First, nothing seemed out of place. Then I saw it. In the corner, near the far wall, a figure was crouched low, facing away from me. It was human-shaped but wrong. Its limbs were too long, too thin, and its back was unnaturally hunched. The flashlight caught the shine of something slick on its arms, like they were wet. The scraping noise started again as it dragged one of its elongated fingers across the concrete floor. "Carl," I whispered, though I knew it wasn't him. The thing froze. Slowly, its head turned, the movement unnatural, like a marionette on tangled strings. When its face came into view, I felt my stomach drop. It had no eyes, just hollow sockets that seemed to drink in the light. Its mouth stretched impossibly wide into a grotesque smile, revealing rows of jagged teeth. It let out a sound, a guttural, rasping noise somewhere between a laugh and a growl, and lunged toward me. Time slowed as the thing lunged at me. Its movements were jerky, almost like it was glitching in and out of reality, yet somehow it was fast, too fast. I stumbled backward, tripping over a pallet jack and crashing onto the cold, hard floor. My flashlight spun out of my hand, its beams slicing across the walls in wild arcs. The creature stopped inches from me, its grotesque grin widening. It tilted its head, as if studying me, and for a moment, I swear I heard it whisper my name. Not in a voice, just a rasping hiss that somehow formed the syllables. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding, and grabbed the nearest thing within reach. A heavy wrench someone had left on a workbench. "Stay back," I shouted, raising it in trembling hands. The thing didn't hesitate. It lunged again, and this time, I swung the wrench with every ounce of strength I had. The metallic clang of the impact echoed through the storage room as the wrench connected with its head. The creature reeled, its body twisting unnaturally as it staggered back. Black, viscous liquid dripped from the gash where I'd hit it, but it didn't scream. Instead, it laughed. A low, distorted chuckle that reverberated in my bones. I bolted, wrench still in hand, and sprinted out of the storage room. My flashlight lay abandoned on the floor, but I didn't dare stop to grab it. The overhead lights in the main store were flickering wildly now, plunging the aisles into alternating darkness and harsh, sterile light. Behind me, I heard it skittering after me, its nails clicking against the tiles like claws. "Help!" I screamed, even though I knew no one would hear me. The store was empty except for me, Jen, and Carl, and I hadn't seen either of them in a while. My feet carried me toward the front of the store, toward the safety of the parking lot and its distant glow of streetlights. As I rounded the corner into the electronics aisle, I froze. Standing in the middle of the aisle, motionless, was Jen. Her back was to me, and something about her posture was wrong. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and her arms hung limply at her sides. "Jen," I called out, my voice trembling. She didn't move. "Jen, we have to get out of here. There's something—" I stopped mid-sentence as she slowly turned to face me. Her eyes were gone, replaced by the same hollow voids as the creature chasing me. Her mouth stretched into that same impossible grin, and when she spoke, her voice was layered, echoing as though a dozen people were speaking in unison. "It doesn't like the light," she said. Before I could respond, she let out a guttural scream and charged at me. I ducked just in time as she swung a piece of broken shelving at my head. I didn't wait to see what she'd do next. I took off running again, dodging past aisles of flickering lights and displays of cheap holiday decorations. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they'd give out at any moment, but I couldn't stop. I burst into the break room, slamming the door shut behind me and wedging a chair under the handle. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold onto the wrench. The room was dimly lit by the glow of a vending machine, casting eerie shadows across the walls. My phone was in my pocket. I fumbled it out and dialed 911, praying for an answer. "911, what's your emergency?" a calm voice said. There's something in Walmart," I stammered. "It's not human. The line went dead. A soft tapping sound came from the door. At first, I thought it was Jen, but then the tapping turned into scratching, long, deliberate strokes that sent shivers down my spine. And then, from the other side of the door, I heard that raspy, distorted voice again. "It doesn't like the light." The scratching stopped. I held my breath, wrench clutched tight, staring at the break room door. The silence was worse than the noise. It felt like the entire store was holding its breath with me. My phone was useless now, the 911 call nothing more than a dead signal. The dim light from the vending machine flickered ominously, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Then came the sound I dreaded. A soft click. The door handle turned slowly. I braced myself, gripping the wrench so hard my knuckles turned white. The door creaked open, inch by inch, revealing the dark expanse of the store beyond. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a hand slid around the doorframe. It wasn't Jen's. The fingers were too long, the skin too pale and stretched, almost translucent. Black liquid dripped from its fingertips, pooling on the floor like oil. My stomach churned, but I didn't dare move. The head followed, peeking around the corner. Those hollow sockets stared at me, drinking in the dim light like a predator sizing up its prey. It tilted its head in that unnerving, bird-like way, and then it smiled. "Doesn't like the light?" it rasped, its voice layered and unnatural. My gaze darted around the break room, searching for anything I could use. The vending machine. The glow wasn't much, but maybe, just maybe, I grabbed the nearest chair and hurled it at the vending machine. Glass shattered as the chair broke through the front panel, spilling candy bars and chips onto the floor. The vending machine's internal light burst brighter for a moment, flooding the room with a warm, white glow. The creature shrieked, a horrible, guttural noise that echoed through the store. It recoiled, retreating into the shadows just beyond the door. For the first time that night, I saw fear in those hollow sockets. The light, it wasn't lying. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I grabbed one of the fluorescent tubes from the broken vending machine and held it out in front of me like a makeshift torch. The bulb flickered weakly but stayed on, casting a faint glow around me. With the wrench in one hand and the glowing bulb in the other, I stepped cautiously into the main store. The aisles stretched out in every direction, their ends swallowed by shadow. The air felt heavy, almost alive, as though the store itself was watching me. "Jen," I called out, my voice trembling. "Carl," no answer. The silence pressed in, broken only by the hum of the remaining lights and the faint sound of something dripping. I moved toward the front of the store, staying close to the light. My only goal was to get out. Forget Jen, forget Carl. I had to survive. As I passed the electronics aisle, I froze. Jen was there, standing motionless in the middle of the aisle. Her head snapped toward me as soon as I stepped into view. "They're watching," she whispered. Her voice was wrong, flat and lifeless, like a badly synced recording. "I'm sorry," I whispered back, gripping the light tube tighter. Jen tilted her head, her mouth twisting into a grin that stretched far too wide. Then she lunged. I swung the tube instinctively, the light flaring as it connected with her side. She screamed and fell back, writhing on the floor as smoke rose from her skin. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, and I gagged, stumbling backward. But I didn't stop. I ran, dodging past displays and empty shelves, the faint glow of the parking lot lights growing brighter in the distance. I could hear it behind me, the skittering of claws, the guttural laughter, the echo of distorted whispers. The front doors were in sight now. I sprinted toward them, heart pounding, lungs burning. My reflection in the glass looked as terrified as I felt. But as I reached the doors, I froze. They wouldn't open. I slammed into the doors, praying they'd budge, but they didn't even rattle. The automated mechanism that normally hummed to life when you approached was eerily silent. I pressed my face against the glass, looking for any sign of movement in the parking lot, but it was empty. The glow of the streetlights seemed impossibly far away, separated by this invisible barrier keeping me trapped. Behind me, the skittering noise grew louder, echoing off the walls. It was close, too close. I spun around, clutching the flickering fluorescent tube like a lifeline. The shadows at the far end of the store seemed alive, twisting and writhing as something moved within them. I couldn't see it clearly, but I could feel its presence, a suffocating weight pressing against my chest. "Doesn't like the light?" I muttered to myself, forcing my shaking hands to steady the makeshift torch. The thing stepped out of the darkness. Its body was even more distorted now, limbs bending at impossible angles. The hollow sockets of its eyes locked onto me, and its smile widened, splitting its face almost in two. Black liquid oozed from its mouth, dripping onto the floor in slow, deliberate plops. It didn't lunge this time. Instead, it stalked toward me, its movements slow and deliberate, like a predator savoring its prey. I backed up until I felt the cold glass of the doors behind me. "Stay back," I shouted, thrusting the light toward it. The tube flared weakly, casting harsh shadows across its grotesque form. For a moment, it hesitated, its smile faltering. But then it stepped forward again, undeterred. I was out of options. My heart hammered in my chest as I looked around, searching desperately for something, anything, that could save me. That's when I saw it. The emergency fire alarm, mounted on the wall to my left. I darted toward it, shoving the light tube into the creature's path to slow it down. The thing hissed and recoiled, but it didn't stop. My fingers fumbled with the alarm as I yanked it down, praying it still worked. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a deafening screech filled the air as the sprinklers activated, raining cold water down on the store. The fire alarm blared in sharp, rhythmic bursts, and the lights above flickered wildly before flooding the store with a blinding, pulsating glow. The creature shrieked. It was the first time I'd heard it sound. Pained, it stumbled back, its distorted limbs convulsing as the bright light tore through the shadows. The black liquid pouring from its body sizzled and evaporated in the water. I didn't waste a second. With the sprinklers and lights disorienting it, I swung the fluorescent tube again, the fragile glass shattering against its side. The creature let out one last, ear-splitting wail before it collapsed, its body dissolving into a thick, black puddle that seeped into the cracks of the floor. The store went silent, except for the steady spray of the sprinklers and the wail of the fire alarm. I stood there, drenched and trembling, staring at the spot where the creature had been. But I wasn't safe yet. The emergency lights cast long shadows across the aisles, and from those shadows, I saw movement. More of them, not just one. There were many. "No," I whispered, stepping back toward the doors. "No, no, no." The glass doors suddenly hissed and slid open. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but I didn't hesitate. I sprinted out into the parking lot, not daring to look back. My car was parked at the far end, and I ran toward it, adrenaline surging through my veins. I fumbled with my keys, nearly dropping them twice before managing to unlock the door. I threw myself inside and slammed the door shut, locking it just as the first shadow reached the edge of the parking lot. The things stopped, their hollow sockets staring at me from the edge of the light. They didn't cross into the parking lot. Instead, they just watched, their grotesque forms silhouetted against the glow of the streetlights. I started the engine, the roar of the car breaking the eerie silence. The things didn't move, didn't flinch. They just stood there, waiting. I didn't stick around to see what they'd do next. I hit the gas and tore out of the parking lot, the Walmart shrinking in my rearview mirror. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel, but I didn't care. I just drove as far and as fast as I could. I didn't stop driving until I was well outside of town, my car eating up miles of empty highway under the dim light of the moon. My mind was racing, replaying the night's events over and over like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. The shadows, the whispers, the things, none of it felt real, yet I could still smell the metallic tang of their black liquid and hear the way their claws scraped the tiles. Finally, I pulled into a 24-hour diner, parking as close to the neon-lit entrance as I could. The parking lot was empty except for a single semi-truck idling near the back. I stumbled out of the car, my legs barely holding me up, and made my way inside. The place was quiet, the kind of stillness that felt more unnatural after everything I'd just been through. A bored-looking waitress stood behind the counter, chewing gum and flipping through a magazine. She glanced up when I walked in, her eyebrows raising slightly at the sight of me. Drenched, shaking, and pale as a ghost. "Coffee?" she asked, her tone flat. I nodded, collapsing into the nearest booth. She poured me a cup, set it down in front of me, and walked back to her magazine without another word. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting its warmth seep into my freezing fingers, and tried to steady my breathing. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. I pulled it out, half expecting it to be the police calling back about my earlier 911 attempt. Instead, it was a message from an unknown number. The text was simple, but it made my blood run cold. Doesn't like the light. I dropped the phone like it was burning my hand. It clattered onto the table, the screen still glowing with those 4 words. My pulse thundered in my ears as I looked around the diner, half expecting to see one of them standing in the shadows. But there was no one. Just me, the waitress, and the trucker sipping his coffee at the far end of the counter. I grabbed the phone, deleted the message, and shoved it back into my pocket. My hands wouldn't stop trembling, and every time I blinked, I saw those hollow sockets staring back at me. I wanted to believe it was over, that I'd escaped, but deep down, I knew better. As I sipped my coffee, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The shadows outside the diner seemed darker than they should have been, pressing up against the glass as if waiting for the right moment to seep inside. When the waitress came by to refill my cup, I asked her a question, my voice barely above a whisper. "Hey, you ever hear anything weird about the Walmart down the highway?" She stopped, the coffee pot hovering mid-pour, and gave me a look I couldn't quite read. "Which one?" she asked, her gum popping loudly. "The 24-hour one, by the interstate." Her expression darkened, and she set the pot down on the table with a thud. "Yeah," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They shut that place down last month. Said it was some kind of electrical problem, but..." She leaned in closer, glancing around like someone might overhear us. "I heard people went missing there. Employees, customers. Never found 'em." I felt my stomach drop. "When did it close?" I asked, my throat dry. "About 3 weeks ago," she said. "Why?" I didn't answer. Couldn't. I just sat there, staring into my coffee as the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The Walmart I'd worked at tonight, the one I'd barely escaped from, it wasn't supposed to be open. The waitress's words hung in the air like a bad omen. I stared at her, the world around me narrowing into a suffocating tunnel. My thoughts churned as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The flickering lights, the doors that wouldn't open, the creatures whispering, mocking, the store itself silent, empty, as though it were a shell waiting to be filled, waiting for someone like me. I couldn't stay in the diner. The walls felt like they were closing in, the buzzing neon sign outside casting an eerie glow across the Formica tables. I threw some cash down on the counter and stumbled back to my car, the cool night air doing little to calm my pounding heart. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. More wrong than it had already been. My headlights cut through the dark, the road stretching endlessly ahead. The farther I got from the diner, the more the events of the night seemed to twist and blur in my mind. Had I really seen those creatures? Had the store really been full of shadows, whispers, and horrors? Or had my exhausted mind conjured it all, desperate for some twisted sense of excitement in the monotony of a night shift? But then I saw the clock. It was 2:37 a.m. My breath caught in my throat. I glanced at my phone. The time matched, glowing back at me with cold precision. It had been 2:37 a.m. when I first heard the crash in the back of the store. It was still 2:37 a.m. My car's dashboard clock confirmed it, too. The seconds didn't tick. The numbers didn't change. The road ahead began to look familiar. Too familiar. The neon lights of a gas station appeared in the distance, but as I got closer, my blood ran cold. It wasn't a gas station. It was Walmart. The same Walmart. The one I had just escaped from. I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding to a stop in the middle of the empty highway. The store loomed ahead, its fluorescent lights flickering like dying stars. The front doors slid open as though welcoming me back, revealing the same shadowed aisles, the same oppressive darkness. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, this isn't real." But the hollow sockets of those creatures appeared in the doorway, their distorted forms stepping into the light. They were waiting for me. The phone in my pocket buzzed. Trembling, I pulled it out and looked at the screen. "It's not the light you should fear," It's the dark that follows. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the phone. The creatures were moving now, closing the distance between us with jerking, unnatural strides. I threw the car into reverse, tires screeching, and sped backward down the highway until I was far enough to spin the wheel and turn around. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. 2 weeks later, I quit my job, moved to another town. I left everything behind. Friends, my apartment, even my car, which had started making strange noises that sounded suspiciously like whispers. But the shadows followed. No matter where I go, I see them. In the corners of my apartment, in the alleys when I take out the trash, in the reflections of store windows. They never get closer, but they're always there, watching. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the faint sound of claws on tile, and when I close my eyes, I see those hollow sockets staring back at me. The time on my clock? It's always 2:37 a.m.